Hey everyone, DJ here, and this is going to be the first part of a series on rendering jewelry in cycles. I'm going to be sharing a couple tips and tricks with you on how to make this look really, really nice. If you haven't yet, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And if you are interested, we also have a Discord where you can jump on there, ask questions, or share any of the projects you're working on or renders or just chat. And we also have a Patreon, so if you're interested in donating to help cover the costs of any of these videos, that would be much appreciated, and you can find the link down below in the video description. So the first thing that I want to talk to you about is you need to always make sure that when you're starting a project, you have to kind of know what you're doing first. And it's a thing, it's a step that's missed a lot when people start working on projects. So the first thing is you need to kind of have some reference material to really know what you're doing. And if you look online, if you go onto Google and you just search for diamond ring, you get some references on what these things should look like. Okay. And it's important to know that a lot of these that are real photography and all that, that's fantastic. But a lot of times with CGI, you want to make stuff look a little bit better or more unique or different or make it look better than real life. So we're going to do a couple things that are going to be a little bit different than what we see in the reference material. But in general, you should be looking at the gold and how that's rendered. And you should be looking at any kinds of little nuances that might be good to add as far as detail. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we sort of go through this, but just keep that in mind. Now, the next thing is that we're going to need an HDRI for our scene, and we need usually there's a very specific one that's used for jewelry, and if you look, if you just do a search for jewelry light box or jewelry, photography or something like that, and lighting setups, usually they'll have some sort of light box. Okay, and this is best, and there's a really good one over here, actually, this one that's on the right. So let me just open this image here. And if you look at this, basically it's, this homemade light box with a little ramp in the back with a gray that basically will isolate that object from the background, and it has a very nice even lighting to go throughout the whole thing. Now, in Blender and in CGI, the thing that you want to do is have an HDRI to go around the environment. With the HDRIs that are available on HDRI Haven, if you go into the like studio and stuff like that, yeah, it's really not this sort of like box setup, which is kind of a bummer. It's not really set up in here, and if you do a search online, I'm sure that you can find, a whole bunch of them and download them, and they might be low resolution or something like that, but I'm going to tell you a really easy way to do that. Basically, if you go online and you download, and I do have a video on this. So if you look at the link below in the description, I'll provide a link there. But basically, there's a video where you can go onto ProRender, you can download the materials library and install it on your computer, and then create a file path to those files and use the HDRI that I am going to be showing you. But you are more than welcome to go and find whatever HDRI you want to throw into the background. But if you're following me specifically, you might want to watch this video, go to the part that talks about how to download the materials in library and how to create that link to the folder so that you know how to navigate to that. The other thing that you're going to want to do before starting this video is you're going to want to also check out this one here that basically shows you how to create the channel set diamond ring that I am showing you. So if you don't have a model yet and you're expecting me to show you how to model a ring from scratch or anything, that's not what this video is. So you can go and check it out on the YouTube link below. So check out the video description there, and I will throw a card in as well so you can click on that link. Do the tutorial there. I will also have this available as a download if you become a patron as well. So if you don't want to create it yourself and you really just want to do the rendering, you can become a patron and download it. The next thing that I would recommend that you do is go on to Texture Haven if you don't have any textures yourself. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to find a type of material that's going to be a sort of scratchy material. Okay, so if you go into plaster, you can see there's a lot of sort of scratchy materials and stuff in here, like this gray plaster here. If we click on this, you can go into these textures and you can either download the entire PBR texture set, or you can just download the diffuse map or the roughness map, which you'll probably want to use. Basically, what you'll want is a black and white roughness map, or if it's color, we will convert it to a black and white roughness map that we're going to use to put onto the metal itself. The other thing that you'll want to do is you'll want to jump into the link that I am providing below in the description, and you're going to want to download this particular chromatic dispersion, or actually not that one. You'll want to download this one here, the JCF Fancy Glass. Okay, and there is a little shopping cart button. You just click on this, and you can see it's $0. So he's giving this away for free. He also shows you how you can basically use these different settings to make these really cool effects and make the shading look really, really neat. And there's a video and all this sort of stuff in here. Basically, what you'll want to do is you'll want to download that. So go ahead and click on the little shopping cart there. You want to go down to the bottom, and in this little field here, put some money in, maybe $10,000 or $100,000 if you'd like. Give him some money. You can also put a 0 in here, add to cart, follow it to download it, and basically you'll want to have that file ready for when we are going to do the diamond shading. Okay, so this should look very familiar. We're in Blender now, and this is the channel set diamond ring that we designed and built together. Or you downloaded it or whatever it is where you got this from, or you might have your own models, which is fantastic. So I have these two here. Very, very simple. We have a band here, then we have a set of diamonds here, another band, and a set of diamonds. Okay. And basically, what we want to do is we want to just start to set up our file. So if we go here to the uh, render engine settings, we're going to change this to cycles, and we're going to change this to GPU. And I am going to, let's see here, keep denoising, keep that off. And I am using Blender 2.93, and there's some really cool stuff with Blender 2.93 that I'm going to show you when it comes to the rendering. So make sure that you have this version installed and updated and everything. And we're going to go ahead and start. So at least this version or higher. The first thing that you'll notice is that there are, if you did not build it with me, you'll see that there are holes here for the diamonds to go through. Okay. And that's really important. So if you do not have a hole here, you need to at least make sure that at no point are your diamonds being intersected by your mesh, okay? So what I mean is your diamonds, if you kind of look inside of them, sort of, you should never really see stuff like this. Now you're seeing that a little bit right now because it actually isn't there when I subdivide this more. But if you're seeing that your diamonds are being sliced all the way through, that's going to cause a problem, okay? So make sure that when you have built out or modeled your ring, that you either use a Boolean operation or you've created channels or these little sockets here so that the diamonds are not being cut through like that, okay? It's very important when you're doing that to make sure that that doesn't happen. And if you notice that your diamonds don't look very great, they look really dull or they look really weird or something, it's probably that they're being intersected by another mesh. Okay, so it's very important that you take care of that. So the next thing that you're going to do here is we want to make sure that there are some bevels going on with our object. When you are creating these things with hard surface modeling, there are times that you create this sort of bevel effect here where it's this very harsh angle changes. Okay, and that's all cool because it keeps things very simple. And how we did it here, we have this bevel and we have created these here. If I hit N in edit mode, you can see up here the mean bevel weight. We have put weights on our edges to create these bevels, all right? And jewelry has bevels to it. Sometimes they're rounded, so you can see that we put this very clean cut design here. You can change the segments by upping this amount and making it rounded like this, but I actually like this sort of design like that, so we're going to keep it like that for now. But the problem here is that when we render this out, the edges are going to be very harsh, and we're going to kind of see that edge. And in real life, there are no real sharp edges like that. There's always some sort of rounding to it. So to keep this looking a little bit more realistic, what we're going to do here is we're going to take this and we're actually going to duplicate this. So if you click this little drop down here, and yours might look a little bit different if you made it. So I have a mirror and I have a bevel and I have a subdivide here. So this bevel, we're going to click this right here. We are going to duplicate it. And then I'm going to pull this down below the subdivide. like this, okay? And if I turn it on and off, you can see that that edge right there, if I zoom in really close, you can see this edge, if I turn it on and turn it off, is getting softened, okay? And it's using the weight method, the limit method with the weight that we put on here, and it's basically beveling just those sections, okay? And if I increase the segments to, 3 or 4 or whatever, it will soften it more. And then if I take the amount here, and let's actually change this to a point, let's say 0.005, we can tighten up where that beveling is happening. If we change this to a 1, it should get a little bit tighter. And if you make this larger, like a 0.011 or something like that, it should look a little bit like more spread out along the surface. But we want to try and keep it a little bit tight to the areas right here. Okay, so I put a 0.0025, maybe a 0.005, just to keep it nice and tight on that edge. And you'll be able to see that a lot easier on your monitors. It probably is getting a little bit compressed with YouTube, but basically make that so that it doesn't look this sharp like this. Okay, so that's why we added that bevel below the subdivision surface modifier. And just to save on the speed, I'm going to take this and I'm going to pop this down to a 2 level for the viewport just to make things a little bit faster. So the other thing that we want to do here is, since I have 2 of these rings, I want to apply this to this one as well. So I'm going to go to the bevel, I'm going to duplicate, I'm going to pull it down below, and I'm going to change this to a 0.005. And then change the count here to, I don't know, a 4 or something. So that'll make it nice and soft. I'm going to take the level in the viewport here on the subdivision surface modifier that I have and put it down to a 2, just so that we can have a little bit faster viewport. The next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to start looking at some materials. But before we start looking at the materials, what we kind of want to do is we want to set our HDRI background that we're going to use for our final render. The reason why I do that, and I don't like to necessarily use the material preview, which uses the EV engine, is because it doesn't really represent the overall lighting on what we're going to do easily, or it doesn't look that great. In my opinion, when you go to the final HDRI that you end up using, you often have to change your materials around a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an HDRI now. So I'm going to go to the world setting here. I'm going to go to the surface, go to color, and click this little yellow icon, go to environment texture. And this is where we're going to click open and then navigate to our HDRI. So if you have an HDRI that you've downloaded, you can use any of the ones that you downloaded from HDRI Haven or anywhere else. But for me, instead of using these, which you can use, I would suggest using the Studio Small. It does end up looking a bit different, um, but that's just what it is. You can use that if you'd like, but in my opinion, what works out really well is if you save the Pro Render materials that I talked about earlier in the video, you can see that right here there is a Studio 007 HDR, and that is a lightbox. So we're going to use this one as our lightbox HDR. Okay, so I'm going to open that up and let's take a look at what this looks like when I click rendered. Okay, so you can see in the background, very simple background lighting, but it ends up having a nice even lighting for our object here. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start to isolate some of these sections to start adding some materials. Let's save, and we're going to go here and we're going to select just this. I call this the male ring just because it's larger. I'm going to hit / on my numpad, and we're going to take a look at this here. Now, normally I would have screencast keys, but it's not really working with this version, so you're going to have to look down here at the keyboard and the mouse, and that's going to have all my key presses, okay? So if we take a look here, and we're going to go over to the shading tab just to make things a little bit easier. You can see that it automatically goes back to this where it has both of them available. So let's hit, make sure you have this one here selected, hit / on the numpad, and now we just have this. And it's also in the material preview. So let's go to rendered, okay? Because we want to see what this looks like with our final background. You can do it with the other ones, okay? You can do it with the material preview if you like, but just from experience, it's better to do it this way. So we're going to start from scratch here. We're going to go to our materials here. We're going to click new, and we're going to call this gold. Now, you can make yours yellow gold. You can make it rose gold. You can make it silver. You can make it whatever you want. You can make it copper. Um, but I've noticed that most, if you look up online, like diamond rings and stuff like that, it's a white gold that they're using, or probably a platinum or something like that. So we're going to go with that method. You're more than welcome to change up a couple things with the coloring and all that. That's totally up to you. But we're going to go with a kind of like a white gold method. To make this a little bit easier to see, what we're also going to do is we're going to go up here to the render settings, and you're going to go down to where it says film and click transparent. So now all we see is this right here. Okay. So we're going to start very simple with this. It's a metal because gold is a metal. And then the roughness, we're going to bring this down a bit to about there. Okay. And just kind of take a look at this. Okay. So it looks okay. It looks silvery like it's supposed to, and that's all fine. But in reality, gold and just things in general tend to have a different, or metal tends to have a little bit of a different reflectivity, or at least the color that's reflected is a tad bit different. And we're going to add a little bit of realism by using a layer weight here. So in your materials here in the node editor, we're going to hit Shift A, and we're going to look for, if you do a search for layer weight and hit enter there, you can see that there's a layer weight here. And I'm using the Node Wrangler add-on. You can just go to Edit, Preferences, and do a search for Node Wrangler, and just click that on so you can do some of the hotkeys that I'm going to do here. So if you hit Control Shift and left click, you can take a look into these different areas here, or these different sockets. Okay, and the same thing back to the principled BSDF. So we're going to go into Fresnel and facing, and you can see that the two have very different ways of presenting this information. So Fresnel really has to do with the way that the curving of the object is done. You can see that in the little cavities and stuff, there's a little bit of a different way that the black and white values, or the gray values here, are being represented. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this Fresnel value to change the way that the colors are reacting to basically where the camera is placed and the object's shape. So we're going to go ahead and add with Shift A color, mix RGB, take the Fresnel, put that into the factor, Control Shift left click and look through the mix. And let's change these to some different colors. So I'm going to make one red and another one green, just so that we can see the obvious things that are happening here. If you take the blend and you increase it, you can see what that does. And if you decrease it, you can see what that does. Now, I'm going to leave it on 0.5. And what we're going to do to control the amount of these values that are being shown here, we can throw a converter, Shift A converter color ramp, and then we can pull these values one way and the other, and we can control how those colors are being represented onto our object. And if you look through here, you can see that we can see the black and white values. In the mix node, it turns it into colors, and then we can take that and put into the base color and look through there. So you can see that there's a different reflected color, and there's a different actual metal color here, which is really cool. So you can make all sorts of different designs for the coloring of your ring or your metal choices. And you can see that as we move the camera, it's changing the way that that's represented. So for our colors here, what we want is the base color, or the top one here. This should be sort of like a, gold color-ish. And the second color, normally how this is done, is the reflected color, this bottom one here, is usually just a lighter version, and usually a little bit less saturated than the top color. And it may not seem like it's really that big of a deal, but it really does add a little bit of realism when you are looking at this. And when you compare renders back like one to the other, if we take this out, for example, you can see that the way that the coloring is done is a little bit different. Even if I take this value here, actually there is a way that I can just drop the color, left click and drag like that. You can see how this is represented, and then if I throw this in here, it's a little bit different. There's just enough for it to actually matter, okay? And a lot of times this does change quite a bit. You might have a darker color here, And then the reflected color should be a lot whiter, like this one, depending on the type of metal it is. So don't skip this step. It's a very important step that you should do when you're coloring this stuff, especially when you look down in here. Okay. So I'm going to take this top color and I'm just going to take some of the saturation down. And you can do a search online for PBR textures or the PBR color hex values for this stuff. I've noticed that I usually end up changing it anyway because it usually looks a little bit off to me. So I'm just going to use this for now. But you're more than welcome to make your own coloring effect here. You can make a copper, you can make a gold, you can make a white gold. Just look for those values online and try and get the actual CGI um, PBR hex values for the coloring that you want. The next thing here is that the roughness, you really don't want to have something that has 100% reflectivity. Even the most polished thing in existence isn't 100% reflective. But also with rings, a lot of times they have sort of like a satin finish, or they're not 100% buffed. Okay, so let's just add like a 0.1 to this for now. And the other thing is there's usually a little bit of anisotropy to it as well. So we're just going to add a little bit this anisotropy here, which you'll only see if there's roughness to it, okay? So if I take this off and I put it on, it's only really going to be visible if you have some sort of roughness that's applied, okay? So I'm just going to add a little bit of anisotropy to this. You can put it all the way up to 1 if you want. It's really up to you and whatever the reference material is and what the actual metal type is that you're trying to recreate inside of the program. So this is starting to look pretty good, but the thing about rings is that a lot of them, if you look really, really close, there are minute scratches from when they polished the gold or whatever it is that they created it with. So what we need to do is we actually need to like basically have some sort of roughness in here. And we're going to end up using that same roughness map and we're going to pipe it into the normal. I'm going to show you a really unique way to do that. So what's really cool about this shading tab is that it already opens up your navigation window here, as well as a image editor down here, which we're really not going to use. But let's go over here and we are going to open this up and I'm going to navigate to the textures folder, which is where I have all of my Texture Haven materials. And you can basically just navigate to wherever you saved that particular material, and you're going to want to use that here. Now for me, what I used was, if I do a search here for plaster, oops, plaster gray. I used the AO actually. So let's actually, I used this one right here. So plaster gray, and I used the ambient occlusion map. Like I said, you can basically use any black and white value, or if it's a colored value, provided it's not a normal map like this one here. Um, let's actually make this larger, okay, so you can see what I'm talking about. So this is a normal map. You don't want to use that. And if it looks kind of pinkish or whatever like this, maybe don't use that. But you can see this roughness map right here. And there's this AO map right here. I want to use this one because it has some pits and stuff like that in it. So I'm actually going to use this one. So if you click this and you drag it over into the window down here, let's, whoops. You then can use it in this window here. I accidentally closed that out there, but still, it's fine. So if we take this and we Control Shift left click on this, you can see here, if we zoom in really close, we can't really see much, okay? And that's because this is not UV unwrapped, which is not a big deal. If you have Node Wrangler installed, click this and hit Control T, which is going to bring up two nodes, the UV, which is automatic, and then a couple of these other things, and then you have mapping right here, okay? So texture coordinate and mapping to the image. And what we want to do is we actually want to take this object here and pipe that into the mapping node. And it looks all weird, and that's fine, because what we're going to do here is we're going to change this right here, where it says flat, change that to box, and now it's wrapping around our object in a procedural way. We don't have to UV unwrap this object. We have basically just used the object information and we have piped that into this here, which then will wrap it around the object. Now for you, you may not like the size of the material. It may be too big or it may be too small. And you can change that right here by using these scales. And you can click and drag. I'm holding shift right now just to make it a little bit easier. And if you look at it, you can see that it's pulling it in multiple directions. And if I take this and I put this at a 0.1 or something, you can see how it's dragged in this direction here. So it's non-uniform. You can left click and drag down to select all of these. So I'm going to set these back to 1. Or to have a little shortcut to input to this unit here, or these values, if you search for value by hitting F3 there, or hitting Shift A, go up to search right here, you can type in value. And if you take that and you left click and drag that into the scale, you can then use this to change the scale uniformly. Okay, and maybe that's a little bit more like what we want. So let's go a little bit more here. So 5.64, maybe 6. Okay, this will make a little bit more sense when we start to actually look at this. But you can see what's happened. You can see the tiling here. So you got to be a little bit careful with how much you increase it. You can turn this blending on. You can increase this up here, and I'll show you what that does. If we go over here, you can see there's a seam right here. Okay. If you take the blend and you move it up, it kind of tries to blend these the tiles together so that you don't see where the seams are. And then we can try to put a 6 in here. But you'll still see there's some repetition. So it does a little bit, but not always 100% with the resolving the tiling here. So let's just change this to a 1.5, maybe a 2. And that's going to be just fine. We're going to be really far away, and it's just to add a little bit of detail so we don't have to worry too much about that. So what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to use this for the roughness, all right? So we take that, left click and drag, throw it into the roughness, look through here, and just take a look. And you can see there's the roughness map applied there. You can see there's a little bit of detail. But what we need to do is we need to control this material. So it's not enough just to have this here because it's kind of flat and it's just there. We need to also make sure that you have control over how this thing is being presented onto your object, okay? So we're going to add a color ramp. And if we control shift left click and look through here and take this, you can control with the black value um, how shiny, and then with the white value how rough it is. And if we look through here, you can see that we have some bits that are showing here, and we can pull this around and you can see how that is affecting our object. Now with rings, it really needs to be a little bit subtle, the differences between these things. So the all the way white to all the way black is not exactly accurate. We'd want this to be a little bit up here like this because like I said, usually there's a little bit of a satin finish to rings, not always, but usually. And then it's never 100% rough either. So let's pull this down a little bit just so we can add a bit of variance over the surface of our object. I'm going to go ahead and save at this point, and we're going to do a little bit more stuff here. So it's, again, we want to make sure that this is looking realistic, okay? It's not enough just to throw something in and just render it and go, that's good enough. What will separate you from everybody else is your attention to some important details. Now, this is covered in my beginners tutorial series a little bit more closely. You can, I'll put a link in the video description below if you want to take a look at it, but I did a whole series on um, just a basic geometric composition. And what we want to do is we want to make our reflections and our roughness values more or less reflect what's in reality, and it doesn't automatically do that in cycles. In things like LuxCore and even ProRender, they do a better job of doing that out of the box. But in order to make our reflections look a little bit more accurate, we have to do a couple more steps. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take this layer weight, we're going to hit Shift D to duplicate it, and we're going to do this because we don't want to necessarily mess up what we've done up here. And let's hit Shift A, add a converter, color ramp, and throw the Fresnel right into here and take a look. What we're going to do is we're going to use the Fresnel values to multiply the dark and make the areas that are dark a more reflective surface, because as a object is curved towards the top like this up here, the object should actually get more reflective. Okay, and the more it's like this here, it should be less reflective or less rough. So in order to do that, we actually have to swap these values. So I'm going to take these and I'm going to flip them over. You could use an invert node to do what I just did there. And then we're going to take the color and we're going to put it into the bottom here of our mix node. And then we're going to look through here and take this mix and change it to multiply. And if we take the factor and we move it up and down, you'll see that now it is multiplying that value at the top. And if I take this to 0, you can see how it's flat. And if I move it up to 1, you can see that it's darker on those edges. So we're basically creating more reflectivity. And you can see this right here on this edge. As the camera moves around the object, or the object moves around, you can see that that area becomes darker, meaning it's more reflective. Okay, and that's more accurate to what's in real life. So let's take that and we pipe that into our color ramp here, and let's take a look. And now we have a little bit more accurate representation of our reflective properties on our object. So the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to do a little bit of a trick, and we're basically going to take the value here, our roughness, and we're going to use that to create a normal map. And this is a trick that Jocafa sent me or showed me. And what we do here is we go to color, mix RGB, and change this to linear light. Then we're going to take the normal and put that into the top color here. And then we're going to take this right here and we're going to put that into the bottom. And if we Control Shift left click and take a look through there, you may not be used to seeing this, but if we move this up, you can see that it's becoming darker and everything. We're basically creating a normal map, which will create, in my opinion, a little bit more of an accurate way of doing bumps over the top of the surface of this object, because it actually directs the light instead of just being a sort of like bumpy surface. Okay, and the factor here actually is more like it's kind of like a multiplier. So the higher this number, the more obvious it will be, and the lower, the less it's going to actually be visible. So if we take this and we go to vector and then we add a bump right here, take this color and put it into the normal, and take that normal and put it into our principled BSDF here and look through there, we can now control that sort of normal map using this. You can see as we increase it more and more, it's a little bit more obvious. And if you increase it a lot, you can see how much that is affecting this thing. So let's take this and change it to a 0.05, maybe a 0.1. Maybe a 0.0, oops, maybe a 0.05 is a little bit better. Maybe something like that, just enough to be on the surface. And if you really want to see it a little bit easier, remove the roughness here so that you can take a look at what it's doing. And it's ever so slight, but if you zoom in on your object and you take a look, you'll see that the surface has now become a little bit more sort of like textured. And if you look really, really closely at a ring, you'll notice that there are those little sort of changes in the way that the surface is sort of playing. It'll be a little bit bumpy. So let's take that roughness, pipe it back through, and this should be pretty good for this material. So let's go to solid mode, save, and let's go to our layout, hit /, and what we're going to do here is we're going to click on this ring, shift select the other one, and I'm going to go back to my original, hit Control L, and link the materials. And now when I look at this, you can see that now the material is applied to both. So that's going to be it for this tutorial. Hopefully you learned something. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel and you hit the little bell icon for notifications so that you know when the new videos have been released. And I will see you all next time on DJ Tutorials.